But the people who had all the power thought nothing more of us than what was the color of our skin. And to not be able to voice that and stand up for that in this day and time, I can't explain to you the pain that is, because I didn't get this far and become this successful because I was a coward. And in those moments, it makes me feel as though I am a coward.
Thanks for tuning in to Keep It Legal, the show where we break down concepts, litigation, and current events with our legal experts. I'm your host, Mark Anik. Joining us today is Letitia Quinones of Quinones and Associates in Houston. Letitia, hi, how you doing?
I'm great, Mark. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. We have talked around here for quite some time that we need to have Letitia on the podcast, and I'm very excited that we're getting a chance to do it today. So thanks for taking some time out of your schedule.
Of course.
You and I've had the pleasure of knowing you for several years, going on 3 years now. And I know you and I know what you do, but I want to introduce you, if I may, to our audience. So please tell everybody, you are an attorney in Houston. What kind of law do you practice? What do you do?
I am a criminal defense trial lawyer here in Houston, Texas, and have been so for the last 24 years.
Quarter of a century almost. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thank you, I think.
I think it seems rather stark when you talk about it in those terms. You have done cases that perhaps people didn't notice other than you and your co-counsel and obviously the people whom you represent, but you've also been involved in cases that are rather high profile. You and I first worked together when you were involved with Rusty Hardin, who is sometimes known as Mr. High Profile, if I may say that, in the case involving Arkema that grew out of the flooding from Harvey. And then most recently, you are the lawyer representing an individual who's accused in the shooting of the very well-known rapper Takeoff.
Correct.
What is it like to work in cases that are that high profile, where the media is sometimes banging down your door?
Yeah, those cases are a little different in that they are highly sensitive. And what I mean by that is every act that you make or any move that you make is looked at under a microscope. So every filing that you file where you're thinking you're just filing something that you normally file in any case, the media grabs a hold of it and makes it public knowledge to the world, especially with social media in today's time. So in those types of cases, you just have to be very methodical about every little thing that you do, because you want to be responsible as a trial attorney and as an officer of the court as to what you're leaking out there to the potential jury pool. So there are a lot of different facets, Mark, that goes with those high-profile cases.
And I imagine that's a dance that you do to a certain extent in any case, but you just have to be especially careful in those.
Oh, of course. Of course. And the reason that, I mean, you're going to do your best in every case, right? But in every case, it's not broadcasted to the World Wide Web. And so in that instance, you have to be careful. For example, I may file something with the defendant's address in it, on a normal filing, because nobody's really looking at that. But in high profile cases, you can't do things like that. You can't file a motion and perhaps list potential relevant witnesses and their addresses, all those types of things. You have to be very careful with what you're doing in those types of cases because of things like that.
Okay. We invited you on the podcast because February is Black History Month, and we wanted to talk a little bit about that, but I also want to talk about you and your history. So explain to me and to our audience your own background and how you have a stake in Black history.
Well, for one, I'm African-American. At least my mother was African-American. My father was Dominican. But I pretty much grew up as an African-American because my father was murdered when I was 2 years old. So I was raised in a Black community. So, of course, Black History Month is very dear to me because it really kind of exhibits the struggles that we've had as well as the victories that we've shared with each other and with the world. So Black history for me, and especially as an attorney, which is something that, maybe 70 years ago would have been very difficult for me to be. I take a lot of pride in it, and I take a lot of responsibility with that as well. So it's near and dear to me for those reasons.
How would you say you identify? Uh, would you tell someone you are African American or Hispanic or both?
Yes, both, but primarily probably African American because that's what people will assume about me, and I don't take the time to differentiate. So primarily African American.
You said your dad was murdered when you were a little girl, and I don't know if I knew that. And I would feel awful if I just went past that and didn't express sorrow and ask about it. What happened?
So, Mark, one of the things that I believe is that everyone on earth or in life has a purpose. I really believe that we were all created for whatever God's purpose was for our lives. Everything that I've been through in my life, as I was going through it at the time, it appeared to me to be some very tragic, traumatic stuff. As I walk in the purpose that I believe God has for my life, I realized that it was all a plan. And so you asked me what happened with my father. And my father, you ever heard that song, Papa Was a Rolling Stone? Wherever he laid his hat was his home.
I
One
have.
would my one Okay, one may characterize my father as a rolling stone, if you will, to say a lot about him. And when of course, I don't remember anything about him, but when I try to think about who my father was, what I think about is at the age of 16, he migrated to the United States on his own to a foreign country with a foreign language that he could not speak. And I hold that near and dear to me because it is what gives me courage in everyday life. If he can do that, certainly I can navigate through this world. But when I was 2 years old, my father spent a lot of time in the quote unquote streets. And he liked to gamble and things like that. And one night he got into an argument with another man in a club, and he was shot in the head twice and murdered that night. And I was 2 years old at the time.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Does that affect you even today?
Oh, of course it does. Yep, it definitely does. It affects me in terms of, dealing with my clients and sometimes the lifestyle that they lead. I remind them that there are children who are waiting on them to get home every night. And sometimes I share that story with them that some of the decisions you make not only affect you, but it also affects the people that love you and that you're responsible for. And so I wouldn't know the depths of that, but for the experience that I had on my own. And so that goes back to my statement as to every road that I've traveled to get me to where I am today. I believe it was a plan or a purpose. So yeah, of course, I take it with me.
I want to get back to this topic of Black History Month. It occurred to me as I was getting ready for this that, when I was growing up, I didn't know about people like, I'm a big baseball fan, but I didn't know about Satchel Paige. And I didn't know about Josh Gibson, who was probably the greatest home run hitter of all time, right? I didn't know about Buck O'Neill. I didn't know about the Tulsa race riots, but I know about those things now. Are we doing, in your estimation, are we doing a better job of educating all of us about Black history than perhaps we did 50 years ago?
Yes and no, Mark. I think here recently, maybe in my opinion, over the last 2 to 3 years, I think that there has been more awareness to Black history than it has been in the past. And I really believe that it's a direct result of things like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Tyree Nichols and all of those things like that. I think that has brought to the forefront that there needs to be awareness about the Black history, the rich Black history in America today. And because of that, now you're seeing more things highlighted. For example, the Grammys this year. the main focus was hip hop and that music and how it originated and how it really shaped, some of us today and shaped some of the music that you hear now. I don't think 10 years ago that ever would have been a thought of anyone or even possible. But I think that America, or at least the majority of America, is trying to make strides to educate people about the positive things that go along with Black history. So are we doing better? Here recently, I think we are doing better, but I do think we can do more. I do.
You mentioned Tyree Nichols and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And unfortunately, if you and I wanted to, we could add more and more names to the list. When you see events such as that, most recently the Nichols case, what goes through your mind? Because what goes through my mind is, I wonder, are we going backward rather than forward?
So much, Mark, goes through my mind. It's very heavy when I see things like that for so many reasons. One reason that it's heavy for me is because I deal with that line of work all the time. At home, my husband may say, "Oh, let's watch this movie like the Emmett Till movie." And I will tell him, I can't watch that because it puts me in a very negative space. And I have to go into the trenches of the courtroom where there is this systematic, I believe, oppression that still exists. And I want to enter the courtroom open-minded. I don't want to enter the courtroom with a chip on my shoulder or in a defensive stature against people I've never met before without giving them the opportunity to be just and to be fair within our criminal justice system. So when I look at things like that, it puts me in a bad place in terms of trying to administer justice and fight for justice in the courtrooms in a system that oppresses Black and brown people, to just be frank. So it just permeates with what America should be and what it's not. And what I mean by that is when we look at the TV and we see something like that, it's, oh gosh, another Black kid that's been killed at the hands of the police. Yes, there's outrage. Yes, there's, everyone's in the streets protesting, some nonviolent, some violent. But after all the hoopla, it just dies down again because we've almost become numb to it. So when I see that, it makes me sad. It makes me angry. I have so many emotions. I remember being at a get-together one time, and I was the only African-American at the party. And this lady says, well, if he never would have passed a counterfeit dollar bill, then that wouldn't have happened to him. And that upsets me because my response to her was, I don't remember being where the death penalty was eligible for passing a $20 counterfeit. And it's that type of thing that upsets me and makes me angry. So I really limit my exposure to those things because I don't want to become that. I always want to stay open-minded with every individual, every prosecutor, every judge, every police officer that I come across. So again, it just makes me sad. It makes me angry and still confused.
You mentioned, and I would be remiss if I did not go back and explore this, the systematic oppression of Blacks and Browns in the criminal justice system. And you and I, that's a separate podcast, right? That's a separate series of podcasts. But if you could change one thing in the court system tomorrow and make it more fair, make it more in line with the pledge that you and I took, equal justice for all, what would you change?
The need for money for adequate representation. That is what I would change.
Is it a case that people who are of means do not have to worry as much as others if they need criminal defense help?
Absolutely. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. One of the things that I tell my clients are, And listen, he was acquitted by a jury of his peers. We accept that. But one of the major reasons O.J. Simpson is free is because he had over $2 million to put towards the defense. He had the best lawyers, the best investigators, jury focus groups, all of those things, jury consultants, all of those things play a role. I mean, think about it, Mark. It's one man, John Smith, against the United States of America, or John Smith against the great state of Texas. Isn't that like bringing a slingshot to an AR rifle fight? I mean, just if you think about it that way. And so if the average person does not have funds to put towards the defense, how do we equalize that fight? So yeah, there is a difference, and there will always be a difference as long as money plays a part.
In the, I want to go back to Nichols and George Floyd and those cases. Many, many years ago, I was a reporter, and you would show up at the scene of something that happened at some period of time before, right? And witnesses would tell you, hey, they did this and then they did that. And you were in a position where you had to choose to believe or not believe the witnesses and what they were saying. Nowadays, we have body camera video, and we have people standing on the sidewalk in the George Floyd case, right? Multiple cell phones shooting all sorts of angles. Do you ever stop to think, where would we be if we did not have video everywhere?
Oh yeah, we'd be where I was or where we were when I first started practicing. Because when I first started practicing almost 25 years ago, those things didn't exist. And so all you had was this person saying that the police brutally beat me, or they treated me unfairly, or, they didn't find that piece of contraband where they said they found it. And you wouldn't know, because it would be that person's word against the police officer's word, and the police officer's word was always taken with more credibility than that individual defendant. Well, now it's not like that. And so now, oftentimes, when one of my clients say things went awry for whatever reason, there's video to back it up. And it has changed. It's changed the way that police officers are treating defendants. It's changing the way that they're dealing with mental health issues while they're out there on the streets, because now they're being watched and now they're being held accountable for their actions. And so, yeah, it's a difference.
Do you think, because, and I'm interested in your opinion, because you are in the courtroom, you're in the trenches, that change in terms of how we perceive police officers and whether we believe or not what they're telling us, how are juries processing that from what you observe? Do they process police officer testimony the same way they did 25 years ago?
That's such a great question, Mark. No, they're not. I'm going to tell you specifically why I say that. In all of my voir dires, I tell them this. I'm going to give a statement. You tell me what you think about it. So 20 years ago, when I would say to the jury, here's the statement: all police officers tell the truth. All police officers are credible. 20 years ago, everyone was, yes, they are. Yes, we agree. And yes, they're police officers, by golly, and they would never lie and they would never do that. And I would take the time to remind them they're still human beings. Police officers are human beings, and human beings are not perfect. And so I would have to educate them in that realm, right? Now, when I make that statement, half of the room is, that's not true. Whereas before, it may have been less than 10%, which is about as many Black and brown people that would show up for jury duty. So now, though, I think it has crossed racial lines because of the awareness that has been brought before America in terms of what the bad police officers are doing. And let me say this, not all police officers are bad. I want to make sure that that gets out there. I've encountered way more credible, hardworking, ethical police officers than not. But yes, the juries are far more aware of what bad police officers are capable of now.
staying in the courtroom, you and I were talking recently about what happens to you sometimes. We were talking about the progress that we've made in this country in terms of our, hopefully, our attitudes with regard to race and ethnicity and all of that. And you told me about something, being a woman who's both African-American and Dominican, that has happened to you in court. And it made me pause. It made me feel awful as your friend because I know what a professional you are. Tell our audience what has happened to you in court.
So, on several occasions, especially when I first started out, when I would walk in the courtroom with a suit on, by the way, and a briefcase or something of the sort, I have been asked if I was the defendant's girlfriend. I have been asked whether or not I was the interpreter for the day. I have been asked if I was the clerk of the court or if I was even the defendant once. I have been asked a wide array of things that certainly did not fit the posture in terms of how I appeared, meaning with a suit on, with a briefcase, with heels, looking professional. And one thing you know about me, Mark, is that I'm going to always be honest about how I feel. And I just encourage people to do the same. I just don't think that they would have asked me those questions if I was a white male. And I just don't believe that. So these are things that I've encountered 25 years ago and something I've encountered as, 9 months ago. I was asked if I was the interpreter by someone who represented a co-defendant on a federal case that I had. It's tough to take that because now I have to build myself back up to being an attorney after you have belittled the same studies that I had, the same law school, bar exam, everything that you did, I did. But because of the color of my skin or perhaps my gender, that is stripped from me. Because surely as an African-American Latina female, you can't be a lawyer. So it never goes to their mind that she could be a lawyer. They would rather think of me as the defendant's girlfriend or the interpreter.
Do you have to, one of my favorite movies of late about African-American history is the movie about Jackie Robinson. And Harrison Ford plays Branch Rickey, the owner of the Dodgers. And there's a scene in the movie where he looks at, is it Chadwick Boseman, unfortunately, who's passed away? And
Yes.
he looks at the character playing Jackie Robinson. And he says, "No, I need you not to fight back. I need you to be strong enough not to fight back." Are there times where you still have to bite your tongue, like we wanted Jackie Robinson to bite his tongue so that he could make that progress?
Unfortunately, yes. And that is when I'm at my lowest, is when I have to endure those things. In 2019, maybe 2020, I was in Edna, Texas, Jackson County. I encountered one of the most racist judges, the most racist judge I've ever come across. And there were things that I truly wanted to say. There were things that I wanted to get off of my mind for being treated in the way that I was being treated, and my staff was being treated, and my client was being treated. But I couldn't, because if I did, the only person that would suffer would have been my client. And my client was actually found, that case was ultimately dismissed against him. But the people who had all the power thought nothing more of us than what was the color of our skin. And to not be able to voice that and stand up for that in this day and time, I can't explain to you the pain that is, because I didn't get this far and become this successful because I was a coward. And in those moments, it makes me feel as though I am a coward. And that is so opposite of who my mother raised. But it's much like that piece in the film that you talk about. I have to weigh the balances. And that is something that I have to take on. And I remember the younger lawyers looking at me when we finished court that day and said, "You're not yourself." And I said, "Unfortunately, in this jurisdiction, I can't be." And that's some pain, Mark, you'll never understand. And I equate it to people. It's like childbirth. Unless you've given birth, you can't explain it. And unless you've felt racism, you can't understand it to the realm that I do or other African Americans do. When I first attended UT, and the frat boys would run behind me and my girlfriends and call us nigger girls and jigaboos. And we were just there to get an education just like them. We paid our money just like they did, albeit mine was student loans that I've paid off in full. But that stuff is hurtful. And then you want me to go to class and learn? And I was just chased, being called a nigger girl and a jigaboo. Those are real things that happened to me. Just trying to get an education in 1995 and 96. So being African American in America is a different lifestyle. And you learn to live with the pain. But you are in pain.
Well, first of all, I appreciate you sharing that because we all need to hear that, right? We need to hear that you deal with those things in the courtroom, even though you have a JD, even though you've gone through all the classes, you've passed the bar, you've represented people for 24 years. We need to hear that. I also think other side, I want to end on a positive note. I don't want to be Pollyannish. And I think everything that you've given us is so good and real for people to hear. But it occurs to me that if Dr. King were here, he might see this, the African-American lady and the white guy, I'll tell our audience, of Italian descent, sitting here having this discussion, this very real, honest, hey, this is what happened to me and still happens, present tense, in my career. And he would be happy that we're seated here at the same table electronically, and we're sharing these things and trying to figure out how to make it a more perfect union, right? When you look at a positive in terms of race relations, when you look at a positive in terms of your own career path, what does your mind come to? What does it rest on?
So if he were standing here and watching us in this communication and looking at this, Black/Latina lady, he would be so proud. Because just as there have been and still are some pitfalls, there is growth, there is awareness, there is tolerance, and there is love on the other side of that. And that is manifested through my own career. I work with the infamous Rusty Harding. I am of counsel now of his firm. That's growth, that's tolerance, that's love, that's acceptance. And that story, real briefly, is one where he called me one day. He knew I was African American. He knew I was half Latina, and he knew that I was a woman. He still called me that morning. I did not know Rusty until he called me that morning and asked me if I would meet him for lunch. If I didn't have any plans, and I always like to joke about this and say if I did have plans, I didn't have them anymore after Rusty called and wanted to meet for lunch. And he offered me a spot on a trial team against the case you spoke about when we first opened the show, the podcast, on the Arkema case. And I had a good relationship with that court, and he had done the research, and he had learned that I was qualified. And that was enough for him to give me a shot. And so that's the growth I'm talking about. That's what Dr. King would have been proud of. And what he would have even been more proud of is that when Rusty Hardin gave me a shot, I jumped all over it. And I showed them my talent, and I showed them the work ethic that I encompass. I showed them the integrity in spite of that exists within me. And when there were jury focus groups that we were doing, I volunteered to do it so they can see my talent and learn while I was there. And when Rusty saw my talent, he went to this multi-billion-dollar French company and said, I know you've hired Rusty Harden, but that young lady needs to give the opening statement in this case. Now, keep in mind, Mark, that we're talking about if we lose this criminal case, billions of dollars are at stake, okay? Because there was a class action suit with several thousand plaintiffs, represented by 4 or 5 different plaintiffs' lawyers in the civil court, all waiting to see the outcome of the criminal case, which was a fallout from Harvey. Because if there was a criminal conviction, you can imagine those judgments in the civil suit would have been extremely high. But Rusty, who we all know is a white man, went to those people and he fought for me to give the opening statement. And they said, well, we didn't hire Letitia Quinones, we hired Rusty Harden. And he said, but Rusty Harden is telling you that's the woman for the job. He didn't say that was the Black woman for the job or the Latina woman for the job. That's the lawyer for the job. And they acquiesced and gave me the opportunity. And not to toot my own horn, but just to tell the story. You know, I am a trial lawyer, so there is a sense of arrogance there, just a little bit. I knocked it out the park. And I was on a national stage at that point. And it caused me to have to hire you guys as my PR team because of the notoriety that I was getting, because I was finally being acknowledged for the work I had put into this field. And so, yes, I told you about some dark times, but it is because of the good times and the sun is shining now that I stand before you as accomplished as I am today. Board certified in criminal law, owning my own law firm, and being of counsel with the infamous Rusty Harden. So yes, there's been a lot of growth and I'm grateful, and we're still growing. So I think it's been more good in my career than bad for sure.
Letitia, I so much appreciate you joining us and sharing these stories and your thoughts with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Letitia Quinones of Quinones and Associates in Houston. You can visit quinonesandassociates.com for more information about the firm. That's QUINONES and Associates.com. Make sure to like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and tune in next time to Keep It Legal. I'm your host, Mark Anik. We'll see you then.